Okay, thank you very much. Excellent. I'm going to have Andy Newton come up and give a presentation on the current state of RDAP. I think it's fairly important as we evolve the technology that makes this all work. Go ahead, Andy.
Thank you. My name is Andy Newton. I'm the chief engineer for ARIN. And I think 2 years ago, I came and gave a presentation on RDAP, so I'm going to give an update on the state of things. So, RDAP. Getting back to the basics of what it is, it's the Registry Data Access Protocol, and its genesis really was from where ARIN and the RIP NCC separately developed protocols that allow you to get to RESTful data, or get to WHOIS data via RESTful means. Turns out they were incompatible. We did these kind of separately and didn't really know that each other were doing it. As it also turns out, there have been a lot of people who have complained about WHOIS in the past for other reasons. And these complaints are basically things you've probably heard of before. There's no internationalization in WHOIS. There's no clear way of understanding where to find the authoritative server for data. There's no authentication. There's no security. That's a big one now, since privacy is a big concern these days. And probably the biggest issue with WHOIS is the standard actually does not specify the different data formats. So nearly every server operator has a different data format, and it doesn't make it easy to write clients that can parse that data. These things have been talked around about for a long time, and the WHOIS, the RESTful services that the RIP NCC and ARIN did kind of helped prime the pump at the IETF to start working on a standard RESTful way of doing this. The IETF started looking at this in 2011, and in March of 2015, they finally produced some RFCs on it. So the basics of RDAP: it's a RESTful service. It's JSON over HTTPS. The HTTPS provides the security and the authentication, and the JSON provides structure and internationalization support. The protocol itself supports both domain name registries and IP address registries. And the way the protocol is structured is that the features of the protocol, the queries and the data model for representing IP addresses and autonomous system numbers and getting all that information is really a superset of what the domain name registries need. It turns out that IP address registries also have domain names. We call them reverse DNS. But a lot of the semantics are the same. The only place where it really does not overlap is with name servers. We tend not to have first-class name server objects, or the domain name registries do. The way the JSON is modeled is done in a way that allows someone who's programming to this to be able to reuse code over and over and over again. So it defines some common data types and then wraps those or puts those into some common data structures which are repeated throughout the JSON. Finally, you have object classes which represent things like IP networks, autonomous system numbers, domain names, and so forth. And then those are all wrapped up into containing objects called search results. So it's fairly straightforward. The other thing that RDAP gives you is bootstrapping. So this is how you find the server that you need to query. And in RDAP, the way the IETF specified this was they said the IANA should produce some JSON files that clients would go and get periodically and parse. So the IANA has these files. They're listed here. There's two for IP addresses, one for autonomous system numbers, and then one for domain names. So in the IP addressing model, the way this works for bootstrapping is not as straightforward as it is for, it's not exactly the same as it is for domain names, because we have ERX and we have transfer resources between regions. So the way it would work really is a client would query an authoritative server. In this case, we have the client querying for 45.65 1.1. And they would ask ARIN, hey, IANA points to the ARIN saying that space resides with ARIN. However, it's been transferred to APNIC. So the ARIN servers would then return an HTTP redirect saying, telling the client to go talk to APNIC. In this model, I actually have a Bootstrap server in here. That's kind of a helpful service. Wasn't really specified by the IETF, but there are these things called Bootstrap servers, and I'll talk about them in a minute. So, March 2015 is when the RFCs came out, so it's been about 3 years since RDAP has reached standards or proposed standard status by the IETF. So where are we? At present, all the RIRs have deployed RDAP. So each one has an RDAP service that has whois data in it, and you can query it. It works great. The other thing we have are these things called Bootstrap servers. So what a Bootstrap server is, it takes those 4 different IANA files periodically from IANA, puts them into a web server, and allows a client, an HTTP client, just to send the query directly to the Bootstrap server, and the Bootstrap server then does a redirect, an HTTP level redirect, to the proper authoritative RIR server. So clients no longer need to worry about going and getting the Bootstrap data if they don't need to. That's very great for things that are like running in web browsers and so forth. Aaron developed a Bootstrap server. We deployed it, we open sourced it, and shortly after that, LACNIC took the open source code. They needed some other features in it that we didn't provide, so they took that, they improved upon it, and then they've deployed it as well. So both Aaron and LACNIC have Bootstrap servers. On top of that, LACNIC has 2-tiered authentication. Now this is a topic that's been talked about in the whois space for a long, long time, getting 2-tiered authentication to whois data. So LACNIC has actually gone and done it. So if you query LACNIC server and you do it repeatedly over and over again, they're going to start rate limiting you. Well, if you want to, if you really have a good need for that data and to query them so often, you can apply for an API key, very similar to the API keys that we use for our Reg RDBS service. You can apply to LACNIC for an API key and they'll give it to you, and you can use it with their RDAP service, and your rate limits will go up significantly. In the domain name space, a lot of good stuff has happened in the RDAP world. Unfortunately, it hasn't been such a good run on the domain name side. So far, we only have 4 CCTLDs who have deployed an RDAP service, and then 1 GTLD provider, which would be VeriSign. So, as far as tooling goes, Aaron, LACNIC, and APNIC have all developed conformance testing tools. So these are test suites that anyone can download and they can run against their RDAP service to test whether they've met the letter of the law as far as the RFCs are concerned. And these help both server operators and client implementers. Aaron's also developed a command line client called NICinfo. It's the best-in-class command line client according to the Mark Koster's Software Review Index. So, it's a joke. Anyway, if you have a Ruby system, if you have a system capable of doing Ruby like Mac OS or Linux, you can even do this on a Windows box. You type gem install NICinfo and you'll get the client. Looking at GitHub, there are well over 30 projects that are RDAP related, so there's a lot of code out there. And APNIC has this really cool, I couldn't find the link, but APNIC has this really cool tool called Visual AS or VisAS, which they use to query autonomous system information from the different RIRs, trying to map out how the networks are pieced together. And it's a very interesting little research tool they have. And I would also be remiss not to point out that APNIC has done a lot of work as far as social media goes, and they have a nice blog series on RDAP as well. I think about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, Jeff Houston demoed this at an Aaron meeting. This is the APNIC RDAP history tool. And when he came and demoed it, we were all like, ooh, that's really cool. Well, they actually went back and improved upon it. Looks even slicker than it did before. And here's the URL if you want to go look at it, query it, play with it. It's a wonderful little tool. And finally, we have LACNIC's RDAP web client. This is very new. In fact, I'm not sure everyone in the LACNIC community has seen this. But they told me about this last week. This is their RDAP client. It's completely inside the browser. It's 100% JavaScript. And I was looking at it, and they may potentially open source this software. They're looking at doing that. And if they do, there's potential that Aaron and LACNIC could collaborate on this. We have a suggestion, an open suggestion for implementing an RDAP web client ourselves. So this would be a good opportunity to collaborate for the RIRs. It's actually written in AngularJS, and as it turns out, we have a lot of developers who are familiar with that framework. So it's a good opportunity. The future. So Aaron's looking at providing a way to search for networks based on origin AS. As some of you may know, when a network is registered with Aaron, there's an opportunity for the registrant to put the origin AS information on that network. And we're looking at ways to allow you to search RDAP for the networks based on the origin AS that's been provided. At the IETF, I only have one thing listed here, but there are two efforts going on there. The guys at VeriSign, who are doing a bang-up job, the guys at VeriSign are looking at object tagging, and basically what object tagging is being able to create a namespace for name servers and POCs and orgs and things like that. They're called entities in the RDAP space, and being able to create an official way of creating a namespace for them. So it really codifies some of the things we've been doing here in the RIR world, where you see -Aaron on your POC handles or -ripe on the ripe contacts. It's a way of codifying that, so it's much more of a best common practice. As a side note, Scott Hollenbeck at VeriSign started on that effort about 2 years ago with the IETF, and he just now finally got to the adoption phase. So sometimes things move a little slower in the IETF than we'd appreciate. So anyway, the other thing that is being worked on, again, VeriSign's doing the bulk of this heavy lifting here, is the federated authentication with OAuth. So again, they're looking at using OAuth 2.0 and the OpenID Connect standard to try to allow federated authentication with RDAP. And so what that means is you'd have third-party entity providers providing identity, so RDAP servers could do authorization based on those identities. And if you think about that, maybe an example of how that might work in our space is, I said LACNIC has that rate limiting that goes on. Well, as opposed to applying for an API key from LACNIC, there may be a future where they trust identities from Aaron, so you could actually query the LACNIC server and have your rate limits go up based on the identity that Aaron provides, if you have like an Aaron Online account or something like that. That's the type of possibilities we're talking about there. Finally, there have been some gaps that we've noticed between the RDAP implementations. Matt Griswold did this great presentation called Death to Who Is at the last NANOG. And he's been playing because of, he's been looking at using RDAP for helping out with the peering DB work. And he's discovered some inconsistencies that we probably need to clear up. And on top of that, there have been a couple of people who have commented on mailing lists, both at RIPE and Aaron, noticing that there are some things we need to fix. And we've also discovered these internally as well. So we're working with the staffs of the other RIRs. We're going to address these problems. In some cases, they are fixes to our implementations, just things that just slip through the cracks. In other cases, we actually need to do improvements to the standard itself. We need to either go back to the IETF and get things extended, or have some best common practices about how the operating model works. And finally, this is an outgrowth of APNIC's history tool, but there's been some talk about doing bulk RDAP. Now, what this would be is a standard way of representing all the data in a bulk format. And the idea here is that since most of the RIRs have bulk data formats, but we all don't do it the same, it would be great if there was a common way of specifying this data. So when you're writing tools to use do bulk imports from the different RIRs, you don't have to do it in 5 different ways. And it also would work for the domain name registries as well. So that's it. Any comments, questions?
Microphones are open.
Yes.
Yesterday, David Farmer, University of Minnesota, Aaron AC. Yesterday we had a bunch of discussion about data privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on features or capabilities we need in RDAP to help support that?
So that would be more along the lines of the 2-tiered authentication. So
Yeah.
maybe, and I believe RIPE does this to a certain degree. They do this with both WHOIS and RDAP. Whereas if you query them at a certain rate, they'll give you, I think it's email addresses and names. But if you go over a certain threshold, they start just backing off the data they give you. They'll still give you results, but they won't give you all the PII or what could be considered PII. There's one way of doing it. We could also just do simple tiered authentication where you authenticate to the server and then you get the PII, whereas people who don't get it. It's technically possible. It's really more of a matter of policy.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Paul Wilson from APNIC. That's a really interesting presentation. I'd like to see us do it at coming APNIC meetings because we think RDAP's pretty important. So really nice to see that, and thanks for the links to APNIC. For information, if anyone is interested in seeing either that VizAz tool, it's apnic.net/VizAz, VIZAS, and WhoWas is apnic.net/WhoWas, which is an easier URL than that one. So that's just for information. Something that occurred to me very briefly yesterday, and I haven't had the chance to think about this properly, is just again in an extension of our use of RDAP. Would it be appropriate to use RDAP to achieve that API access to the routing registry, which was raised, I think, by Owen yesterday? It's not something I've thought about deeply, but it may be something that we could consider if API access is actually being requested.
For provisioning the data or for getting the data?
For getting the data, for query.
Yes, we have thought about doing extensions for that as well. So.
Okay, great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Costers?
Yeah, more Costers, Aaron. Andy, could you go to the federated authentication? Can you talk a little bit about what we've done at Aaron regarding OAuth?
Yeah, we have actually created some OAuth. We've taken an open source OAuth server. I think MITRE wrote it, and we've done some back-end work to integrate it into our systems. The use of OAuth we're not just looking at it for doing RDAP work. We're actually looking at it to create session state on the client side for Aaron Online. So we have a number of suggestions that have come into Aaron about increasing the timeout and doing things to make Aaron Online better as far as how a customer sees that. And what we need to do, there's an architectural issue that we have with Aaron Online where we need to move session state into the client because right now it's kept on the server, and that will improve the user experience with Aaron Online tremendously. And OAuth is one of those keys to getting that done, and that's how the authentication will work. I've talked to some I'm not a security expert, and I don't like to play one, but I've talked to security experts who deal with web authentication, and they've said the messaging I always got was don't try to create your own security framework on the web. You'll probably mess it up. Just use OAuth, and that's probably a pretty good idea in my opinion. So we've looked into that. We have some OAuth work done. It's still sitting there ready to go. We've had sometimes the best laid plans of mice and men don't go the way you want. But we have it, it's still there, and hopefully when we get around to getting back to dealing with some other issues that we have going on within engineering, we can actually deploy OAuth. And the plan is to, when the IETF gets around to specifying how OAuth works with RDAP, that we'll be ready to go. Yes, Kevin.
Kevin Bloomberg, The Wire. Really great to see open source tools available for this. You want to bootstrap something, make it easy, and those tools make it easy. The more tools available in open source, the more it's going to get used. Just guaranteed. That was the first thing.
Oops.
The second was in regards to Origin AS. And just a clarification, Origin AS is an Aaron unique, it's used predominantly in the Aaron region as part of the application process or part of Aaron Online, or is it used across all of the regions?
So that's a good question. I was, up until about 2 months ago, under the impression that Aaron was the only RIR that did this, but I was informed that LACNIC also does it. And while they, as far as I know, don't have any plans to do this with RDAP, they are looking at what we are doing, and they may try to implement it themselves. But they do this as well.
So where that was going was having a feature matrix among the RIRs as to, supports this feature, this query, this feature, this, it's the same, so that we know when it's the same and when it's different, or when the results, when this feature is only supported in ARIN versus it's supported in all 5 of the regions, or LACNIC only supports this feature. Having that matrix is really useful when somebody's looking to, especially a multinational is looking to deploy this type of, or use these types of services.
All right, that's a great idea. I will say the protocol itself does announce those types of features, but unless it's written down somewhere, it's hard to get to. So that's a good idea.
Hi, Alicia Trotman, Government Barbados and RNAC. I see you had some CCTLDs there. We actually administered .bb CCTLD, and I was wondering what's the procedure to deploy, and is DNSSEC, even though it's security, the reason for that is security, we are not yet DNSSEC compliant, and is it required to get on board with RDAP?
No, DNSSEC is not required. The requirement is that you stand up an RDAP server and then you go register it with the IANA. That's really all there is to it. Now, standing up an RDAP server can be easier said than done, I understand that, but so that's going to be the big hurdle. But getting it into this list really is a matter of registering it with the IANA.
Okay.
And we have a remote participant?
Yes, we do. Thank you. Andrew Gallo, GWU. What, if anything, is the relationship between Origin IS and the WHOIS record, RPKI, and ARIN's IRR project?
So that's a good question. Some people have noted that a route object in the IRR and an RPKI ROA, and then all of a sudden this Origin AS on a network semantically look the same. And in many cases, they are communicating similar or the same data. I believe really the only difference is the intent of the person who gave the information to us. So in this case, we would have to go read the policy under which we register the Origin AS, but I don't know if the network operators registered that information with us with the intent that it's used for creating routing filters or whatever. It's much more the case with ROAs and IRR route objects. So that's really where the difference lies, is the intent of the person who gave us the data. Yes, David Farmer.
David Farmer, University of Minnesota, RNAC. One point, pedantic point, the 3 things you just mentioned, Origin AS, ROAs, and
Route objects.
Route objects and IRRs. There's some minor details about, is it just the specific route, or is it less or more specific routes included? There's some details in difference between them. Origin objects, if you read the more specifics, in theory should be included. Route objects, they should not be. And ROAs depends upon what the ROA says. The ROA has a semantics to decide that. And so there's some subtleties there.
Right, exactly. And certainly an RPKI ROA object is a little more expressive than this Origin AS. But it all does come down to mapping an AS number to a prefix. And so the semantics are very, very similar.
Aaron Hughes, in this case, no particular hat, just a point of information related to the last question. There is some work being done in the community around standardizing where to get useful, authoritative source of information about AS set to prefix. I believe Job Schneider is leading the effort around a discussion for rewriting IRRD with the intent of, when a ROA is created, removing all IRR objects from all IRRs running the software, and instead create an object saying there is a source that is pointing at a ROA to clean up this mess over the long term. So the discussion is starting. I believe he's going to do a presentation at RIPE in Marseille in a few weeks, but to address this exact issue. Who's got the authoritative source for where to build prefix lists from?
Yes. Any other questions? All right, thank you.